This is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell on the Premier Radio Networks.
Really interesting watching the reactions on the Fast Blast to the Reverend Storm. There's every range you can imagine, from thank you to I've always wondered to it worries me to boy am I angry, this is just a religious advertisement, to you name it, the entire range of spectrum of reaction you might get to a story like this. And I've never had one told on the air like this. No story like this, certainly. And so it's kind of interesting to observe the reaction out there. It ranges from joy to, I guess, just passionate interest to anger. He's written a book called My Descent into Death and the Message of Love Which Brought Me Back. And I just went myself to Amazon.com, and it received a 5-star review. You know, they take an average of all the customer reviews who have read the book, and it's got a full 5-star review on Amazon.com. Anyway, that is the title of his book. He wouldn't tell you, I will. My Descent into Death and the Message of Love Which Brought Me Back. Check it out yourself on Amazon. We'll be right back. Somebody comments he's giving us a lot more detail than he was able to do on Oprah. He was on Oprah, I guess, and of course he is. This is radio, not television. You're able to get into a lot more detail. Reverend, welcome back. So you were allowed to ask questions. That has got to be one of the most unusual opportunities a human has ever had. Nuclear war would not be allowed. Anything else?
Let's see. Like I said, I think I asked thousands of questions. I asked them, what's going to happen in the United States? And they said that this country had been given more than any other nation in the history of the world, and that this was a gift from God, and that God expected us to do a lot with this gift, and we were not doing it, and God was very displeased with America, and that what God was expecting America to do was to be the moral leader of the world, a place where educators, engineers, scientists, teachers would stream out of this country and bring the rest of the world up to the kind of standards that we enjoy, and instead we were more or less exploiting the rest of the world for our own.
Gee, the last time God got disappointed in a specific area, there was Pompeii.
Yeah, and so I said, what's going to happen? And they said, unless America changes its ways, America is going to lose all that it's been given. And I said, well, how? And they said, economically, that our economic system would fail and we would sink into chaos, and that the rest of the world would turn their backs on us, because although we are greatly admired by the rest of the world for our prosperity and our wealth, that we're deeply resented because the rest of the world knows that we are basically taking advantage of our position of power in this world, and that God wants the United States to be a force for good in the world instead of just...
So as your individual ego was demonstrated to you, really that was sort of answering that the national ego is as much a problem.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's right. And I asked them questions about religion, like, for example, I said, which is the best religion?
Huh.
And I was expecting them to say, Presbyterian or Methodist or Catholic or something.
Yeah. Well, I would be interested in the answer.
And the answer was the one that brings you closest to God. That's exactly what they said. And I said, well, which is the one that brings you closest to God then?
Yes.
And they said, it depends on the culture and the tradition that the person was raised in, would be the one. And I said, well, are religions all the same then? And they said, no. They said there's good religions that have good and bad people in them, and there's bad religions with good and bad people in them, and it really doesn't have to do with religion. It's about what a person does with it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have a perfectly awful religion and have a really good person doing good in it, and you can conversely have a really fine religion and people tearing it down.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been my experience since then, that religions are not inherently good or bad. It's what the individual does with it that makes it either worthwhile or a detriment to, human progress in respect to love. I asked them about what happens to people when they die, and they said that when a good person dies, that God sends angels and or emissaries, and the emissaries might be loved ones that have preceded them, like, for example, your grandmother or a parent or brother or sister or something.
Right.
To meet that person.
Very common in NDE stories.
Yeah, and that they would then escort that person towards heaven. And as they progressed towards heaven, people would become transformed, and all of the worries and doubts and places where they were deficient in life would be changed, and they would become, in time, fully loving people, the children of God, and that eventually that they would meet Jesus, and they would, in time, be presented to God. And I said, and if not, and they said, well, what happens otherwise. And I said, well, what determines whether a person goes to heaven or not? And they said, well, if a person is loving and has been loving in their life, they will go to God, and if they haven't been loving, they'll go away from God. And that there's not an alternative to those two choices. You're either moving towards God or away from God, and there's nothing in between. And the journey to God doesn't necessarily happen very quickly. In the case of Mother Teresa, she would be on the express route,
yes.
The non-stop train to God.
Yes.
Someone like me, I'd be on the milk train, making all the local stops while I became a better person in the process.
Okay. So what an incredible opportunity to be able to ask all of these questions. I don't suppose you posed one about Buddhists and others who have faith but not in the God that you're talking about right now, who had Jesus on earth, and all the rest of that.
No, I didn't. I wish I'm going to get to have this experience again sometime when I leave this world. But
you may not be able to come back and tell us about it, though.
Right. But at the time, I had no religious background. I'd never read the Bible or anything.
Gotcha.
I didn't go to church, and so
gotcha.
I didn't ask really good questions. They were real kind of dumb, but that's where I was at that time. The outcome of all this is that I finally said to him, I said, okay, I'm ready to go to heaven. I want to go to heaven. Can I go to heaven now?
Enough.
And they said, no, you're going back to the world.
To the world.
So we had a huge argument. And I was trying to convince them that it was in my best interest that I go to heaven, and they were trying to convince me that that just wasn't going to happen, and that I had to come back to the world. And like, for example, I said to them, if you send me back into the world, I'm going to make lots of mistakes, and then I'll end up right back where I was. And what would be the point of all this if I'm going to go back into the world and be a perfect human being? I said, if you send me back, am I going to be perfect? And they said, no. And I said, so I'm going to make all these mistakes all over again? And they said, yes, we know you're going to make mistakes. That's the nature of human beings. They make lots of mistakes. And I said, this time try and learn from your mistakes instead of just repeating them over and over and over again and just keeping doing this.
Same thing.
Yeah, they said they can be learning experiences, and you could actually become a better person by learning from your mistakes. And I said, don't worry about your mistakes, that if I took my mistakes to God and confessed my mistakes, that God would forgive me and that would be the end of them. They wouldn't be held against me. I said that